Okay, imagine this. You've got a story that kicks off with a powerful spiritual practitioner, some robbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's this mysteriously left behind meat and like a midair delivery service.
Sounds pretty wild.
Totally. It sounds like something out of a legend, doesn't
Sure.
it? Well, it kind of is, but it leads us straight into the nitty-gritty of foundational rules for an ancient spiritual community.
Definitely.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really close look at a unique set of sources. These are excerpts from a text called Nissaggiya V.
Yeah, and this isn't just, dry history.
No, not at all.
It's more like a living document showing how this community actually hammered out its ethical guidelines.
Piece by painstaking piece,
Yeah.
right, through real-life situations.
Absolutely. What's so illuminating here, I think, is we're not just learning about a rule in isolation. We're seeing the actual human stuff, the interactions, the challenges that made the rule necessary in the first place.
Right.
So our mission today really is to trace those events, understand the initial problem, see how the rule first got set up.
And then how it changed.
And then watch how feedback, from the community itself led to really crucial tweaks and more nuanced ways of understanding it.
Get ready for some surprising details because they really bring this ancient world to life. And they show us how these principles, things like trust and conduct, were carefully woven into the fabric of this nascent spiritual movement.
It's quite a process.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story begins in a place called Rajagaha. The Buddha's there, residing at Vihāvana Kalinda Kanivapa.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, our main character, Uppalavaṇṇā bhikkhunī, she's a fully ordained female monastic. She's over in Savatthi.
Different city.
Yeah. So one morning, she's been out for alms, and she heads to this place in Havana for her day resting, finds a spot under a tree. Peaceful, right?
Seems so.
Well, this is where things take a, let's say, unexpected turn. A group of robbers enters Havana. They've just killed a cow and taken the meat.
Okay, so not exactly peaceful neighbors.
Not quite. And the chief robber spots Uppalavaṇṇā. But here's the strange part. He actually thinks, if my sons or brothers see this bhikkhunī, they'll harass her.
That's surprisingly considerate for a robber.
Right. So he decides to take a different path to avoid her. But before he leaves, he takes some of the choice cooked meat, wraps it up in leaves, hangs it on a tree near her.
Near her, but not to her directly.
Exactly. And he says out loud, whoever sees this, monk or Brahmin, take it as given. And then he just leaves.
Interesting. A kind of anonymous offering?
Sort of, yeah. So Uppalavaṇṇā, she comes out of her meditation. Here's what the robber chief said. She takes the meat, goes back to her place.
Okay.
Then the very next morning, she prepares the meat, bundles it up in her outer robe, and then, and this is where it gets really interesting, she flies through the air. Flies. Like literally flies through the air. The text says, Vehasta Abu Gadfa, all the way to Vidalvana to deliver this unexpected gift.
Wow. Okay, that detail about flying, that's not just color, is it?
Doesn't sound like it.
No, I mean, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it signals the kind of extraordinary qualities that were attributed to some, really accomplished practitioners back then.
So it gives her actions more weight.
Immense weight, yeah. It adds this whole other layer of context. It makes her a figure of, significant influence. Her choices, her interactions, people would notice. They couldn't just ignore this.
Especially arriving like that, with meat from robbers.
Exactly. Her arrival with the meat, given where it came from, it would have immediately drawn attention. It sets the stage perfectly for what happens next.
Okay, so Uppalavaṇṇā lands in Vihāvana, miracle meat delivery complete.
Mm-hmm.
But at that moment, the Buddha isn't actually there. He's gone into the village for alms.
Right.
Left behind is Yasma Udāyi. He's the Viharapala, basically the monastery caretaker for the day.
Okay, the one in charge while the Buddha's away.
Pretty much. So Uppalavaṇṇā goes up to Udāyi, asks where the Buddha is. Udāyi tells her he's gone for alms. Simple enough. Then Uppalavaṇṇā asks Udāyi to give the meat to the Buddha when he returns.
Seems reasonable, a straightforward request.
You'd think. But this is where the whole conflict kicks off. Udāyi's response is, it's pretty audacious. He says, Bhikkhunī, the Buddha will be satisfied by your meat. If you were to give me your underrobe, I would also be satisfied by an underrobe.
Whoa, okay, that's bold. He's asking for her robe.
Her underrobe, specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And Uppalavaṇṇā, she initially refuses. She says, Bhante, that's a term of respect. We women, it's hard for us to obtain things, and this is my fifth robe, I won't give it.
She stands her ground, makes sense. It's essential gear.
But Udāyi doesn't back down. He persists, and he uses this analogy. He says, just like a man gives away an elephant but then argues over a tiny patch of land, so you give meat to the Buddha but won't give me your underrobe.
Wow, laying on the guilt trip there.
Totally. And the text explicitly says she felt pressured. The word is nippiyamana. So feeling pressured, she finally gives him the underrobe and then just goes back to her residence.
You can just imagine the awkwardness and the ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely. Soon enough, other bhikkhunis notice Uppalavaṇṇā's missing her underrobe. She explains what happened. And, well, they complain.
Understandably.
They say, how could Yasma Udāyi accept a robe from a bhikkhunī? Especially when women find it hard to get these things.
Yeah, it seems exploitative, or at least highly inappropriate.
Exactly. So these complaints, they bubble up, they reach the bhikkhus, the male monastics, and eventually they reach the Buddha himself.
So it becomes a formal issue.
A big one.
Mm-hmm.
This incident, yeah, it demands the Buddha's direct attention. He calls Udāyi in, questions him directly. And the crucial point, the absolute key for the Buddha, is the relationship. He asks, are you related to her, Udāyi?
The relationship question.
And Udāyi's answer is crystal clear. Not related.
And that's the pivot point, isn't it? Why does that unrelated status matter so much here? What's the core principle the Buddha's getting at?
Is it about just keeping up appearances, like avoiding any hint of impropriety, especially in a monastic setting where public perception matters?
That's definitely part of it.
Or is it something maybe deeper? About, trust or dependency within the community structure itself?
I think it's both, really, precisely. The Buddha's rebuke, calling Udāyi a foolish man, it isn't just about the act of taking the robe. It's very much about the appearance of impropriety.
Right.
It's about safeguarding the integrity of the Sangha, the order. Maintaining public trust was crucial. And also preventing situations where, frankly, individuals could exploit others or be exploited within that monastic structure.
So it's a boundary.
A foundational boundary for ethical conduct, absolutely. So following this whole incident, the Buddha then lays down the initial rule, the first sikkhāpada, on this. If any bhikkhu accepts a robe from the hand of an unrelated bhikkhunī, it is a nissaggiya pācittiyaṃ offense.
Okay, rule established, problem solved.
Well, not quite. As often happens with new rules, right? There were unintended consequences.
What happened?
The monks, trying to be scrupulous, maybe a bit overzealous.
Reading it too literally?
Perhaps. They misunderstood the rule, or maybe just played it super safe. They started refusing to accept any exchange robes from bhikkhunis, even when it was perfectly appropriate or even necessary for monastic life.
Oh, wow. So, like, if a bhikkhunī had an extra robe that a bhikkhu needed, and they wanted to swap.
Exactly. That kind of practical exchange, called pārivattaka cīvara, they stopped doing it if it involved an unrelated bhikkhunī because of the new rule.
So the bhikkhunis ran into problems again.
They did. Once again, they started complaining about this new difficulty. Now we can't even do a simple exchange. And like before, these complaints eventually reached the Buddha.
It really shows how rules, even ones made with good intentions, can have unexpected ripple effects in practice.
It really does. It highlights how they often need refinement. They need adapting based on the lived experience of the community.
So the Buddha hears about this new problem.
Right. And he clarifies the rule. He doesn't scrap it, but he amends it. He explicitly allows the acceptance of exchange robes from 5 specific types of individuals.
Okay, who are they?
A bhikkhu, another fully ordained male monastic, a bhikkhunī, a sikkhāpada, that's a female trainee, like a probationer, a samansara, a male novice, or a samansari, a female novice.
So basically other monastics or those in training.
Exactly. It shows this remarkable adaptability, doesn't it? It's not rigid dogma.
Yeah, it's practical. So the final refined rule becomes, if any bhikkhu accepts a robe from the hand of an unrelated bhikkhunī, except for an exchange robe, it is a nissaggiya pācittiyaṃ offense.
There you have it.
And this whole process, it's not just about robes, is it? It's about seeing this dynamic living process, how a community actually builds and adapts its guidelines based on real-world feedback, trying to get to the spirit of the law, not just the letter.
Mm-hmm.
What does this quick adaptation tell us about the Buddha's approach to, like, governing the Sangha?
Mm-hmm.
Was it maybe more pragmatic than purely, dogmatic?
Oh, I think it absolutely suggests a pragmatic approach. It wasn't like he was laying down these immutable laws from on high that just ignored human experience or practical problems.
Right, he listened.
He listened and he adjusted. He was creating a practical framework for a community that needed to function, harmoniously. And that framework had to be flexible enough to correct course when unintended difficulties popped up.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to the idea that the Sangha, the community, was meant to be a place of, yes, discipline, but also practical well-being, not just rigid adherence for its own sake.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper into the rule itself, this nissaggiya pācittiyaṃ. It's not just saying you did something wrong. What does that term actually imply?
Good question. It's a specific category of offense in the Vinaya, the monastic code. Nissaggiya means it requires forfeiture. The item involved in this case, the robe, must be relinquished, or nissaggiyaṃ.
Relinquished to who?
To the Sangha, the wider community, or sometimes to a specific group, or even just to another individual monk. There's a formal procedure for doing this. It really emphasizes accountability and sort of resetting the situation.
Okay, and the source is pretty specific about what counts as a cīvara, robe, right?
Right. Very specific. It refers to one of the 6 robes. They had different types, you see, for different purposes. This precision, it's a hallmark of the Vinaya. They tried to leave very little room for ambiguity.
Which you can see in how they detail the offense scenarios. It says it's a nissaggiya pācittiyaṃ if a bhikkhu accepts a robe from an unrelated bhikkhunī, even if he only doubts she's unrelated, or even if he mistakenly thinks she is related.
That's right. It covers knowing, doubting, or even being mistaken but thinking she's related when she isn't. The objective fact, her being unrelated, triggers the offense if he accepts the robe, unless it's an exchange.
Wow. So what does that tell us about the burden of responsibility here? It seems like even an honest mistake doesn't let the bhikkhu off the hook.
Well, it speaks volumes about how critical it was to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, as we were saying earlier.
Right. Perception matters.
Hugely.
Yeah.
It places a really significant burden on the bhikkhu to be absolutely certain about the relationship or certain about the nature of the transaction, like knowing it's a proper exchange.
Yeah.
This kind of meticulousness, you have to imagine, was crucial for maintaining public trust and the internal integrity of the monastic order. It wasn't just about having good intentions. The actions themselves had to be completely above reproach.
Okay, but the rule isn't just about offenses. It also clearly lays out exceptions, right? Situations where there's no offense, the anapati.
Yes, and those are just as important for understanding the scope.
So, for instance, if the bhikkhunī is related aññātikāya, that seems straightforward. But what does acknowledging that exception suggest about how the community viewed, say, family ties versus the broader monastic rules?
It highlights that while, yes, monastic life aimed for detachment from worldly ties, the practical realities and established social structures, like family relationships, were still recognized within the legal framework.
So it's not a total denial of those connections.
No, it's a nuanced understanding of human connection woven into the rules. It wasn't a blanket ban on interaction, but specific rules for specific situations to prevent problems.
What about other exceptions?
Well, the big one we already discussed. If it's a genuine exchange robe, a pārivattaka, even if it's trading a small robe for a large one, or vice versa, that's fine.
Okay, what else?
If the bhikkhu accepts it out of trust or confidence vis-a-vis gatati, this usually applies in specific, pre-existing trusting relationships. Also, if accepted only temporarily tavakali gatati, like maybe just holding it for her briefly.
Practicalities.
Exactly. And significantly, if the bhikkhu accepts other requisites pārivattaka besides a robe, so bowls, needles, medicine, that's different. The rule is specifically about robes.
Got it. And it also doesn't apply if accepting from a sikkhāpada or samana.
Correct. Those trainees and novices fall under a different category for this rule. There's also an exception for accepting from someone considered legally mad or mentally incompetent, where intent is different.
And then there's that fascinating one you mentioned earlier, the adhikamikasa, the first offender.
Right. This means Udāyi himself, the one who prompted the rule.
He didn't actually commit this specific offense.
Technically, no, because the rule wasn't established at the time he accepted the robe from Uppalavaṇṇā. What does that tell you about how these rules came into being?
It really suggests they weren't just like arbitrary laws pulled out of thin air. They were reactions to specific events, weren't they?
Precisely. It makes the system feel very adaptive, almost like a common law system evolving through precedent.
Yeah, case by case.
The rule applies from the moment it's declared by the Buddha, not retrospectively. That principle of non-retroactivity is pretty fundamental in many legal systems, ancient and modern.
So this whole deep dive, it shows us these rules aren't just these dry, arbitrary strictures. They often grow out of these really compelling, very human stories.
Shaped by real challenges, real community feedback, real attempts to build a workable, ethical life together.
So wrapping this up, we went from a miraculous flight,
Started high?
yeah, to what seems like a simple, maybe slightly awkward request for a robe. And we saw how that single incident could spark this whole cascade of events, leading to this really meticulous process of defining and then refining ethical guidelines within this fledgling spiritual community.
And if we sort of zoom out, connect it to the bigger picture, this deep dive really shows us how these ancient wisdom traditions navigated some pretty complex social dynamics.
Yeah.
Establishing boundaries, figuring out trust, managing behavior between different groups within the community. It's a powerful testament, I think, to the idea that knowledge or rules, they're most valuable when you understand their context.
And when they're applied with that sense of collective well-being in mind.
Exactly. And with a willingness to adapt as the community learns and grows, it wasn't set in stone from day one.
So a final thought maybe for you listening. What is this particular story, this rules evolution, what does it reveal about the nature of those early Buddhist community dynamics? You know, the back and forth, the process of establishing these guidelines.
Good question.
And maybe how do similar dynamics play out today? In our own communities, maybe our workplaces, organizations, when rules get made and then maybe have to be adapted. Especially when you're trying to balance the original intent with, well, how things actually look, the appearance of things.
Lots to think about there. The tension between the ideal and the real.
Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.